We've heard about how most blacks, for various reasons, did not escape to the Union lines during the Civil War. But there were some who did, and through some seemingly impossible situations at that. Right now, we're going to take a look at some of those accounts that have been left. We'll be studying from Dr. Litwack's 1979 book, Been in the Storm So Long, The Aftermath of Slavery. And it beginneth as thus. Even in the face of danger and repeated failures, the slaves persisted in their attempts to reach the Union lines. What happened if they made it to the Union lines? They became free people. The Confederate side wanted to secede from the United States and keep slavery, and the Union fought to preserve the United States as one nation and eventually end slavery. So we can see why some slaves persisted even through danger to get over to the side of the Union. Having been thwarted in their initial attempt to escape from a plantation near Savannah, a 70-year-old black woman and her husband immediately made plans to try again. While the plantation whites were meting out punishment to her husband, she collected their 22 children and grandchildren in a nearby marsh. After drifting some 40 miles down the river in a dilapidated flatboat, the family was rescued by a Union gunboat. This is wild stuff. And remember, this woman was 70 years old, and she still went for it.
My God!
She exclaimed as they came aboard.
Are we free?
Her husband subsequently made good on his second escape attempt. What a relief. She made it, and her husband eventually made it too. Respect to that couple, right? Much respect to that couple. No less persistent was a Maryland servant who tried to join others in a mass escape despite the fact that his hands and feet had been amputated some years before because of severe frostbite.
"Well, I got him back and had him tied up,"
the owner told a visiting Englishman.
"For I thought he must be mad. But it was no use. He got away again and walked to Washington."
No feet or hands, only knobs. Can you imagine that? No feet or hands and knobbing it all the way from Maryland over to Washington. Most people today with a working pair of hands and feet would pass out just by hearing that they had to walk the distance. Now imagine doing it with none of those and during the time of slavery. This gentleman was something seriously special. How, asked the curious visitor, could he have managed such a remarkable deed? The answer no doubt must have seemed equally incredible.
"Oh, he just stumped along. He was always a right smart nigger, and he could do many things after he lost his limbs. He could attend to the cooking, and sew with his teeth very well, and could get on a horse and ride as easy as look. He was always a remarkably strong nigger. Why, even after he lost his hands, he could kill a man, almost, with a blow of one of his knobs."
Uh-oh. The persistence of some black runaways came at the expense of their white pursuers. After overtaking his slave in a swamp, a South Carolina master found himself engaged in a fierce struggle. He managed to shoot the slave in the arm, shattering it badly. Knowing what awaited him if captured, the fugitive grimly fought on, unhorsed his master, and then beat him.
Until he was senseless.
It was either you or me, and this time I wasn't going to let it be me. Rather than flee to the Yankees, numerous slaves responded to particular provocations, as they had before the war, by decamping for the nearby woods or swamps, where they might hide out for extensive periods of time. After all, even the much-hunted Nat Turner had managed to elude his pursuers for nearly 8 weeks. Near the end of the war, Anna Miller recalled,
"My sis and Horace runs off. They don't go far and stays in the dugout. Every night they'd sneak in and get lasses and milk and what food they could. My sis had a baby and she nussed it every night when she comes. They runs off to keep from getting a whooping."
Imagine being a grown-up and worried about getting a whooping. How wild is that? Far more dangerous were the colonies of runaways that formed in some areas, from which slaves would forage the countryside for provisions. While searching for runaways, a group of whites in South Carolina found such a settlement in a nearby swamp.
"Well provided with meal, cooking utensils, blankets, etc."
As well as 12 guns and an axe. In Surry County, Virginia, a scouting party investigated a similar runaway camp, but never lived to report their findings. The fugitives killed them. That's how it had to go at that time. You have to remember the Negroes could not reason with the whites, and especially not the poor whites who made up the vast majority of the white population. They couldn't try to explain to them that they did not want to hurt anybody and that they just wanted their freedom, and that's it. The whites could not comprehend that argument, and they only wanted to catch them in N-word, inflict severe punishment, and put them in their place. That's why the fugitives had no choice but to kill them. Now, aside from that, when masters weren't inflicting physical harm on their slaves, they were implanting lies into their mind, or simply doing both. Here we go.
Massa wanted we niggas to go away with him, but we won't come to Yankees, 'cause he treat us too bad. We hear you come down long time ago.
Is that right? What did he say about the Yankees?
Massa said the Yankees would take the niggas and sell us in Cuba and want us to fight, but we talk it over and agreed to come to the Yankees.
You see that? Lying to the slaves and making them think that the Yankees wanted to sell them across the water over into Cuba. This is wild stuff right here. They had to do a group huddle to conclude that Massa was probably lying and that they would take their chances with the Yankees.
When Massa ran away, he shot one man's lip off, who refused to follow him.
Shooting, whipping, hanging, and violence. Do you see the pattern in the Southern way of life, and especially in the ways of the masters? Think about that. The uncontrolled rage of their masters, often for no easily ascertainable reason other than the imminent loss of the war, hastened the departure of many slaves.
They does it to spite us.
A runaway woman testified.
'Cause you come here. They spites us now, 'cause the Yankees come.
This woman had just escaped with 2 of her children, leaving behind her eldest son whom the master had just licked almost to death because he suspected him of wanting to join the Yankees. Stories of recent beatings ran through the testimony of numerous newly arrived refugees.
Master whipped me 2 or 3 weeks ago.
A freed woman declared.
Because I let the cows from the bog road into the yard, struck me and knocked me down with his fist.
Physical abuse and whippings for relatively dumb things. And where do you think the slaves and many of their descendants learned how to punish and make corrections? Think about it.
Left Monday night and walked all the way. I am free. Come here to be protected. Was not safe to stay.
On the morning of his escape, a Georgia slave noted he had been promised a whipping, but
when the time came, this child was about 5 miles from Dar, and he never stopped until last night.
Out of there. This was the last whipping this grown man would receive. Among the slaves who fled after harsh treatment were those who felt compelled to contain their anger rather than risk the consequences of direct retaliation.
They didn't do something and run.
A former slave suggested.
They run before they did it, 'cause they knew that if they struck a white man, there wasn't going to be a
They would return to kill and legally get clean away with it too.
I wants to be free.
A South Carolina runaway kept repeating.
I came in from the plantation and don't want to go back. I don't want to go back. I don't want to be a slave again.
And he really meant it. How do we know? Because he actually ran away. The intensity of this feeling even induced elderly slaves to make the perilous trek, refusing to postpone any longer that dream that had eluded them for a lifetime.
I's 88-year-old.
One refugee told the Yankees.
Too old for come? Massa joking. Never too old for leave the land of bondage.
That's another lesson for the people in the older age range. You're never too old to make changes and never too old to begin another chapter in your life. We already heard about the 70-year-old woman floating 40 miles down the river to get to freedom. And now this 88-year-old man going to see the promised land, right? They didn't let age stop them. Near Vicksburg, where slaves had been deserting in substantial numbers, a planter went out to the quarters and asked the patriarch among his slaves.
Uncle Si, I don't suppose you are going off to those hateful Yankees too, are you?
Oh no, master.
He replied.
I's gwine stay right here with you.
When the planter visited the quarters the next morning, he found that every one of his slaves had left that night, including Uncle Si and his wife. Searching the nearby woods for them, he came across Uncle Si bending over the prostrate body of his wife, weeping. The planter wondered why he had subjected her to such a difficult and now fatal journey.
I couldn't help it, master,
the old man replied.
But then you see she died free.
Whether or not a slave chose to desert his master did not necessarily reflect a personal history of brutal treatment. Alex Huggins, who ran away in 1863 at the age of 12, recalled no complaints about the way his master and mistress had treated him.
Twa'n't anything wrong about home that made me run away. I'd heard so much talk about freedom, I reckon I just wanted to try it, and I thought I had to get away from home to have it.
The verbal exchange that took place in late 1861 between a Union soldier and a runaway revealed as vividly what many whites would find so difficult to understand and forgive in their slaves.
How were you treated, Robert?
Pretty well, sir.
Did your master give you enough to eat and clothe you comfortably?
Pretty well till this year. Master have no money to spend this year. Don't get many clothes this year.
If you had a good master, I suppose you were contented?
No, sir.
Why not, if you had enough to eat and clothes to wear?
'Cause I want to be free.
Despite the accumulating evidence of betrayal, most slaveholders might have readily agreed that the faithful slaves still constituted the vast majority of the black population. They could, as one Virginian did, dismiss any other thought from their minds.
Were not the Negroes perfectly content and happy? Had I not often talked to them on the subject? Had not every one of them told me repeatedly that they loved old Marster better than anybody in the world, and would not have freedom if he offered it to them? Of course they had, many and many a time. And that settled it.
That was the reality, and it should not be a problem accepting that. Some people try to make it seem as though the blacks just jumped off the plantations in droves and went to freedom. And that's just not the case. You have some that really did do that, but most stayed faithful. And what else would you expect from people who had been forcefully conditioned for over 200 years at that point to behave that way? You just cannot expect them to all of a sudden shake off that entire mentality all at once at the drop of a dime. It just doesn't work that way, right? It took time for them to become that way, and it would take time for them and their descendants to get out of being that way. But the difference is the first one was a force. The latter would be by choice. We continue with to the next. I thank you for your time. My name is Brooklyn St. Michael, and I'll see you in the free world.